Did you ever think about leaving? What was the thoughts there?
I did, but at the same time, I didn't feel, I felt like if I left because of where my title was at the time, it wouldn't be a move where I'm moving up or even feel like I'm moving laterally, because my current title was devaluing what I was doing. I had a producer title at that time that, or even like a senior producer, that I was being called that, but I was doing the work of a program director. So if I go somewhere else, they're like, oh, you'll be another senior producer. And now I feel like I'm taking a step back because of the title that I currently had. And so, yes, I was thinking about it, but it didn't feel realistic. It felt like I needed to fight here to get the title I deserve. And now also, this created my mind state moving forward with the company of, all right, I'm not valued. Even if I get this title now, I understand that there's people here who are not fighting for me. And so I need to start figuring out, what is next beyond this place. So if anything, I think that experience was one of the big reasons that made me start thinking critically about starting my own company.
Wow. Yeah. Well, that's actually really cool though when you think about it in hindsight. Like not when you're going through it, but like in hindsight, it changes how you approach the next steps. Like I always say, my past definitely determined. Like even now with managing our team at DCP, like how we approach them, kind of based off of like previous lessons, that were learned overall.
Oh yeah.
So then, where'd you go from there? What happened next?
So so part of this story is that in the background, I eventually started DCP Entertainment, and I was basically getting things in order. What kind of legal documents do I need? Just better understanding the business aspects of what I'm going to eventually be going into. That way, eventually, at the place I was working, I did eventually start making a lot more money. I finally got the right titles, and I started getting stock options and bonuses. So it got to a point where, after having been there for many years, I was able to maybe take this money that I was getting and create or invest it into DCP and really go all in on it. So as I was mapping that out, I got hired away to another company. And as I was working there, I was working with a new team, and I was hoping to have more of an internal team that I could work with. And basically I was running a whole documentary department. And so that takes a lot of different resources. And unfortunately, in the first few months of being there, I didn't have all the resources I needed. And morale at the company was getting low just because I wasn't the only one who was going through these things. And so everybody was feeling overworked. I very much was feeling that. And I tried to, again, take it to my boss in this situation. And much like the situation before, my boss said, you know what? Here's a great opportunity for you to talk to my boss and have a more of a direct relationship there.
How do you keep ending up in these situations? Oh gosh.
So once again, I think I was less excited this time. Not apprehensive, but I was less excited because I'm like, oh, I've seen how this will go before.
Right.
But so we will call this person Jared. And so Jared, I went to speak with Jared. I remember being in a conference room, and actually my initial my direct contact, my boss, was in the room, as well as Jared, my boss's boss. So it's three of us in there this time. And I think I started off the conversation basically saying like, hey, I've been promised these certain resources and we still haven't gotten them. There's been a few false starts of, okay, I think I'm getting somebody and it didn't happen, or you say I have somebody and then I go talk to that person and they have no idea what I'm talking about. And so they get upset with me that they don't have enough time. So it just was this situation. I was trying to lay out what I've been, what's been happening. And then also, okay, well, here are my solutions for it. And as I was saying it, it didn't feel like I was being heard. It just sometimes you get that visceral feeling just based off someone's body language of like, are they hearing you? And it didn't feel like I was necessarily being heard. It felt like, they were just kind of like, oh, this is this one person's experience. So I then used that to then say, and a lot of these things that I'm mentioning are things that I'm hearing from other producers as well. So this isn't just me that I'm hearing from. And I got cut off real quick at that point. From the person saying, well, you can't speak for anybody else. You only talk for yourself. I'm like, oh, okay, my bad. I just wanted to give you a heads up that this is a company culture thing, and I thought you might want to be aware, but okay, fine. I will focus on myself. And again, just kind of laid out, what I was experiencing and trying to approach it from a proactive, point of view of, if we have these other resources, I can do so much more, or I can be more focused on some of these key projects that you want me working on. And Jared's response back to me was, you don't have to work here, right?
Wow.
And basically the pause I just gave you was the pause I had in the room. I looked at him. I think I even did this nod, just a silent, just kind of rocking. I was like, okay. I think I even said, okay. And I shut up for the rest of the meeting. I was like, okay, I understand where I stand now. And that was the moment I decided it's time for me to leave. And that's when I started making real concrete steps of, all right, when am I leaving? How am I leaving? How does that affect my team that I'm currently working with? Though I said I had very few resources, I think I had one person that was working with me at that point on a few projects. And I was like, okay, how do I transition this person in? Because they're kind of new, so I now need to make them more senior. Because at every place I work, I don't want the audience to suffer. And so how can I line up every project that I'm working on? And I produced 13 projects in 11 months, which is absurd, and a lot of them being documentaries. And so how do I leave them on the best kind of standing while also making sure I'm taking care of myself? So yeah, it's just two situations, where I was asked to go talk to my boss's boss, ended up with them telling me that I didn't have the value there that I thought I had. And it wasn't them saying, hey, you're fired. I think they in a sense they knew my value, but they needed me to feel devalued. So I felt stuck there. And I think that happens at a lot of companies. Companies make you feel like they're the end all be all. And so if they devalue, much like a lot of people do in relationships, they can devalue you.
I was just going to say that. I was going to say, it's like that whole company culture in general, like it's like instilling that fear, because even personally, like I was afraid to approach my boss's bosses, sometimes with certain situations. And, that advocacy, like the position you were in, was so important, because sometimes the other folk do need someone to speak up for them, because they might not have the boss's ear in the way that certain managers do. Like, you may try to speak to your manager and they're like, oh, okay, like I don't know who that even is, but she works for me, cool. But it kind of comes off like, like a little bit of like an abusive relationship in a way, where it's just like, speaking backwards to you, like you don't value this place, or if you like kind of calling your bluff. Like if you really cared, you like with the money situation, like if you really cared, you would actually stay. Like, do you care? Is it only about money for you? Like, especially in knowing who you were as a person, because like you said, you cared about the people, you cared about the listeners, you cared about the experience. So, and calling your bluff and taking advantage of that situation overall, it's just like, just hearing you talk, it's just like, it just makes me shake my head, because it really does feel like emotionally abusive and toxic, and in a lot of ways it takes time for folk to even get to the level that you were at, to even understand what really is going on. And by that time, even if you did leave, there are dozens of others coming in the door, eager to try to go the process that you went. So it makes you feel expendable, and like you don't matter. And then honestly, let's be honest, the cost of living is ridiculous. So like you might not have the space to be right to just like leave. But I was going to ask, with all that paraphrasing, you're leaving this spot, you left the previous place to try to better yourself. All in the background it's like DCP. How do you now take that experience as a boss? Like if your team comes to you and tries to approach you, how do you now that you're in the position that they were in, how do you handle conflict or, whatever, with your team? How do you now take those lessons and apply it to your position with DCP?
Yeah. Well, first and foremost, I just know not to just, tell people, hey, you don't have to work here if you don't want to. Don't get me wrong. There are times I want to say that, but I will never use that exact terminology. I think there is a way about approaching things. And I think, even the examples that I gave, some of those people that I was talking about, the Jason and Jared, as I call them, they knew what they were doing in the industry, but they aren't, maybe weren't necessarily great managers at that time. And so I think that was a distinction that I was able to understand, that there's a difference between being great in your field and also being a great manager. And so you have to look at them in tandem, but look at them separately as well. So how can I take these lessons and learn how to be a better manager? Well, part of that is letting your staff feel heard. And so one, opening up lines of communication where you're not just saying, hey, you can come to me on anything, but when they do come to you on things and maybe challenge you on things, are you open to hearing that constructive criticism about either how you're running the company or working with your staff? And that's not to say that, the staff is always going to be right, but let them be heard and feel like you have understood what they've said. And don't be defensive. Don't be like, oh, well, this is the way we're doing it, we're always going to do it that way. I'll say, okay, let me think on that. Let me see if there's ways we might be able to do this better. Or even if you're going to say, well, no, we're not going to do it, but then explain why we go about certain things. So if I'm asking, why I didn't get a certain job title, then follow up with that to say, well, hey, the president of the company has now changed this edict, but let me figure out, how can we work together? Okay, this is what a program director now means, so let's figure out how to get you there. Or let me better understand, why do you want to be a program director? Oh, it's because, this is your career goal. So again, how can we work around this to figure out how to make that work for you?